Chapter 13 of Legacy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peak. Legacy by James Schmitz. Chapter 13. She had felt somewhat self-conscious for the first 2 or 3 minutes, but it helped when she caught a glimpse of their own table drifting among the others and realized that the smiling red-headed viewer image over there looked completely at her ease. It helped, too, that Major Quillen turned suddenly into the light but ardent conversation type of companion. In the short preceding briefing, he had pointed out that a bit of flirting, etc., was a necessary, or at least nearly necessary, part of the act. Trigger was going along with the flirting. He could be right about that. She intended to stay on the alert for the etc. They got nibbles very promptly, but not quite the right kind. The concealed table ComWeb murmured, "A caller requests to be connected with Major Quillen. Is it permitted?" "Oh," Quillen said poisonously. "I suspected we should have stayed off circuit. Who's the caller?" "The name given is Keth Debol." Quillen laughed. "Give the little wolf Major Quillen's regards and tell him it was a good try. I'll look him up tomorrow." He gave Trigger a gentle wink. "Let 'em pant," he said, "at a distance." She smiled uncertainly. If he had a mustache, she thought, he'd be twirling it. There were 2 more calls in the next few minutes of similar nature. Quillen rebuffed them cheerfully. It was rather flattering in a way. She wondered how so many people in the cocktail lounge happened to know Quillen by name. When the ComWeb reported the 4th caller, it sounded odd. "The name given is the Lady Lyad Ermetyne," it said. Quillen beamed. "Lyad! Bless her heart! A pleasure. Put her through." A screen shaped itself on the wall mirror to the right. Lyad Ermetyne's face appeared in it. "Heslet Quillen!" she smiled. "So you aren't permanently lost to your friends after all." It was a light, liquid voice. It suited her appearance perfectly. "Only to the frivolous ones," Quillen said. His thick black brows went up. His face took on a dedicated look. "I'm headed for Manon on duty." She nodded. "Still with the Subspace Engineers?" "And with the rank of Major by now," Quillen said. "Congratulations! But I'd already observed that your fabulous good fortune hasn't deserted you in the least." Lyad's glance switched to Trigger. She smiled again. It was a pleasant, easy smile that showed white teeth. "Would you shield your ComWeb, Quillen?" "Shield it?" Quillen looked surprised. "Why, certainly." He reached under the edge of the table. The drifting viewer images vanished. "Go ahead." Lyad's eyes turned back to Trigger. They were off-color eyes, like amber or light wine, fringed with long black lashes. Very steady, very knowing eyes. Trigger felt herself tensing. "Forgive me the discourtesy of inquiring directly," the light voice said. "But you are Trigger Argee, aren't you?" Quillen's hand slapped the table. He looked at Trigger and laughed. "Better give up, Trigger. I told you were much more widely known than you believed." "Well, Brule," Trigger muttered moodily to the solidopic propped upright against the pillow before her, "you'd bug those pretty blue eyes out if you knew who's invited me to dinner." Brule smiled back winningly. She lay in her cabin's bed, chin on her crossed arms, eyes a dozen inches from the pretty blue ones. She studied Brule's features soberly. "Major Heslet Quillen," she announced suddenly in cold, even tones, "is a completely impossible character." It was no more than the truth. She didn't mind so much that Quillen wouldn't tell her what he thought of Lyad Ermetyne's standing on the suspect list now. There hadn't really been much opportunity for open conversation so far. But he and that unpleasant Belchik Pluly had engaged in some jovial backslapping and rib punching when he and Trigger went over to join Lyad's party at her request. And Quillen cried out merrily that he and Belchik had long had one great interest in common. Ha ha ha! Then those 2 great buddies vanished together for a full hour to take in some very special, not publicly programmed Sensations Unlimited in the Dawn City's inferno. Lyad had smiled after them as they left. "Aren't men disgusting?" she said tolerantly. That reflected on her, didn't it? She was supposed to be very good friends with somebody like that. Of course, Quillen must have some bit of intelligence business in mind with Pluly, but there should be other ways of going about it. And later, when she'd been just a little stiff with him, Quillen had had the nerve to tell her not to be a prude doll. Trigger shoved the solidopic under the pillow. Then she rolled on her side and blinked at the wall. Naturally, Major Quillen's personal habits were none of her business. It was just that in less than an hour he was to pick her up and take her to the Ermetyne suite for that dinner. She was wondering how she should behave towards him. Reasonably pleasant, but cool, she decided. But again, not too cool, since she'd obligated herself to help him find out what the Tranest Tycooness was after. Any obvious lack of friendliness between them might make the job more difficult. Trigger sighed. Things were getting complicated again. While Quillen was indulging his baser nature among the questionable attractions of the Infernal, she'd shot 300 of her pre-call credits on a formal black gown, on what yesterday she would have considered a rather unbelievable gown. Even at an Ermetyne dinner, she couldn't actually look dowdy in it. And then, accompanied by Gaya, who had turned out to be a very pleasant but not very communicative companion, she'd headed for a gambling room to make back the price of the gown. It hadn't worked out. The game she'd particularly studied up on turned out to have a 500 minimum play, which finished that scheme. The system she'd planned to use looked very sound, but she needed more than one chance to try it in. She and Gaya sat down at another table with a different game, where you could get in for 50 credits. In 8 minutes, Trigger lost 120 and quit. Gaya won 75. It had been an interesting day, but with some unsatisfactory aspects to it. She hauled the solidopic out from under the pillow again. "And you," she told Brule warningly, "seem to be playing around with some very bad company, my friend. Just luck I'm coming to see you don't get into serious trouble." She'd showered and was studying the black gown's effect before the mirror when the ComWeb chimed. "Permission for audio intrusion granted," Trigger said casually, without looking around. She was getting used to this sort of thing. "Thank you, Miss Drellganoth," said the ComWeb. "A package from the Beldon shop has been deposited in your mail transmitter." It signed off. Beldon shop? Trigger frowned, laid the gown across a chair and went over to the transmitter receptacle. She opened it. A small flat green package marked the Styles of Beldon slid out. A delicate scent came trailing along with it. A small white envelope clung to the package's top. Inside the envelope was a card. It read, "A peace offering. Would you wear it to dinner in a token of forgiveness? Very humbly, Q." Trigger found herself smiling and wiped off the smile. Then she let it come back. No point in staying grim with a character. She pulled the package tab and it opened up. There were 3 smaller packages inside. She opened the first of these and for a moment gazed doubtfully at 4 objects like green leaf buds, each the size of her thumb. She laid them down and opened the second package. This one contained a pair of very fancy high heels, green and pale gold. Out of the third flowed something which was, at all events, extraordinarily beautiful material of some kind. Velvety green, shimmeringly alive. Its touch was a caress. Its perfume was like soft whispers. Lifting one end with great care between thumb and finger, Trigger let it unfold itself to the floor. Tilting her head to the side, she studied the shimmering featherweight cat's cradle of jewel green ribbons that hung there. Wear it? What was it? She reflected, found her dressing gown in one of the suitcases, slipped it on, sat down before the ComWeb with the mysterious ribbon arrangement, and dialed Gaya's number. The intelligence girl was in her cabin and obviously had been napping, but she was wide awake now. "Shielded here," she said quickly as soon as her image cleared. "Go ahead." "It's nothing important," Trigger said hastily. Gaya relaxed. "It's just..." She held up the ribbons. "Major Quillen sent me this." Gaya uttered a small squeal. "Oh, beautiful! A Beldon!" "That's what it says." Gaya smiled. "He must like you." "Oh?" said Trigger. She hesitated. Gaya's face grew questioning. She asked, "Is something the matter?" "Probably not," said Trigger. She considered. "If you laugh," she warned, "I'll hate you." She indicated the ribbons again. "What is that Beldon, really?" Gaya blinked. "You haven't been around our decadent circles long enough," she said soberly. Then she did laugh. "Don't hate me, Trigger. Anyway, it's very high fashion. It's also..." Her glance went quickly over Trigger. "In excellent taste in this case. It's a Beldon gown."